Chris, aren't you going to kiss me?
You're my brother's wife, Rita. I wouldn't even hold your hand while that condition exists.
But you want to, don't you?
Oh, no. I came up here to see what kind of a hat you wore.
Robert Taylor and Barbara Stanwyck. In the 1936 movie, His Brother's Wife, two of the biggest stars of Hollywood's golden age. But the course of true love does not always run smoothly.
But you're going home. This is your finish as far as the Claiborne tribe's concerned, so get yourself together. That boat's sailing tomorrow, and you're going back on her. And good hunting.
Oh, no, wait a minute. Let me get...
You've got it. All of it. There's just one word. Scram.
I thought this is what we were waiting for, both of us. I thought we were going to be married.
And married in real life they were. For millions of movie fans, it seemed a glittering romance. But the reality was far more interesting. The matchmaker was MGM, the studio which had made Taylor a star. But for Stanwyck and Taylor, it worked. Their marriage endured longer than most in Tinseltown. Barbara Stanwyck was one of Hollywood's greatest leading ladies. Warmer and tougher than Joan Crawford, her closest rival, and always more interesting to watch. The key to her screen character lies between her real and professional names. Barbara Stanwyck was a woman of the world, independent, sophisticated, sometimes ruthless. Ruby Stevens, her real name, suggests a hard surface and vulnerable interior of the Stanwyck alter ego. The broad from the wrong side of the tracks who can masquerade as a lady. Ruby Stevens was born in New York in 1907 and orphaned when she was young. Brought up by an older sister who was a dancer, she found work in speakeasies and eventually on Broadway. From Broadway, it was a short step to the movies. Stanwyck's husky, cracked ice voice made her a natural for the newly arrived talkies. Stanwyck kept her independence and was never tied to a single studio. At this stage in her career, she was managed by her first husband, Frank Fay, the great Fazy, a brilliant vaudeville comedian whose own Hollywood ambitions were wrecked by alcoholism. But he helped to launch Stanwyck on the road to stardom. In the early 30s, Stanwyck's movie career gathered momentum in Hollywood while her husband's languished. Her independence was admired by fellow actors who had signed long-term studio contracts, but it represented a gamble, as no one studio had an interest in building up a Barbara Stanwyck. That she had to do herself. Nevertheless, the contours of her screen personality were emerging. That mixture of toughness and vulnerability required of a woman making her way in a man's world. But her marriage to Frank Fay had become acrimonious and occasionally violent. Stanwyck was frequently forced to seek refuge in the home of her next-door neighbor, Joan Crawford, who was having an equally torrid time at the hands of her third husband, Franchot Toe. In 1935, Stanwyck filed for divorce, bought a ranch in the San Fernando Valley, and began to live by her own rules. She was now a star. Director Frank Capra had played a part in the process with a 1932 movie, The Bitter Tea of General Yen. Another influential director was William Wellman, with whom Stanwyck made Night Nurse.
Say, that's so.
That's how I know you're a bootlegger.
You win.
This looks like a bullet wound.
Well, it's a cinch it ain't a vaccination mark.
Hey, that's a bullet wound.
Hey, nobody sent for you. Go rustle your hot water bottle.
It's about as unethical.
Oh, ethics, ethics, ethics. That's all I've heard since I've been in this business. Isn't there any humanity in it? Aren't there any ethics about letting poor little babies be murdered?
And in Ladies They Talk About, she was superb as a hard-boiled gal of easy virtue.
What do you know about this hold-up, Mrs. Andrews?
I came here to deposit money to cover some checks I had written for train tickets.
Where are the tickets?
Here. And here's the money.
Didn't I used to know you before you became Mrs. Andrews?
I don't think so.
And before you turned platinum?
Hello, Sister Susie.
Hello, Nan.
Well, they took away all my privileges. But there's one privilege they can't take away from me, you dirty little sneak.
In Babyface, Stanwyck was the archetypal gold digger, with a decidedly low opinion of the male sex.
Yeah, I'm a tramp, and who's to blame? My father. A swell start you gave me. Ever since I was 14 months had been. Nothing but men, dirty, rotten men. And you're lower than any of them. I'll hate you as long as I live.
In 1935, the Woman in Red had ended the contract Stanwyck had signed with Warner's and Columbia. She moved to RKO, a studio which was happy to allow her to freelance. At RKO, she starred as the sharpshooting Annie Oakley.
Here we are, my friends. A couple of Annie Oakleys.
Annie Oakley, the winner!
Pure Stanwyck, very feminine and beating a man at his own game. Robert Taylor was born in Philly, Nebraska in 1911. Spotted in college theatricals, he was signed by Louis B. Mayer, head of MGM, in 1934. In contrast to Stanwyck, Taylor stayed with MGM for 25 years. What's in a name? Taylor was christened Spangler Arlington Bruff, sufficient to give any man a personality problem. But as Robert Taylor, he was accommodating and hard-working, malleably handsome material for MGM to mold into a star. A star, but not a great screen actor. Nevertheless, within 2 years, Taylor was throbbing passionately at Greta Garbo in Camille, dutiful but out of his depth.
Take this and come back to me when it dies. Tomorrow night.
It's dead already. Now.
No, it's impossible.
Nothing's impossible now. Send those people in the other room.
I can't.
Then I will. I could kill you for this.
I'm not worth killing, Armand. I've loved you as much as I could love. If that wasn't enough, I'm not to blame.
Taylor gazed with appropriate fondness at Jean Harlow in Personal Property, a vehicle which demonstrated that when it comes to comedy, application, of which Taylor had loads, was no substitute for talent. It was around this time that Taylor was paired with Stanwyck, first in His Brother's Wife, and then This Is My Affair. Next stop for Taylor was England, where he was much happier starring in the title role of a Yank at Oxford. It was a part perfectly suited to Taylor's studio persona, the handsome young smiler who could take any mother's daughter to the dance.
Listen, my sweet little flutterbutt, you don't need to waste any more of that excruciating British humor on me. I'm running.
Yes, running away with your tail between your legs.
No, I'm walking. And in case I never see you again, which I hope, here's something to remember me by.
In truth, MGM had effectively emasculated all its male stars, with the exception of Clark Gable and Spencer Tracy. How could it beef up Taylor's seemingly underpowered image and provide him with a real-life love interest? MGM's publicity department concocted stories about his love of guns and hunting. They linked his name with a number of actresses, notably Barbara Stanwyck. But the studio was stirred into action when in January 1939, Photoplay magazine named Taylor and Stanwyck as one of Hollywood's unmarried husbands and wives, and described in detail the social lives they led on their adjoining ranches in the San Fernando Valley. That article, although outspoken for its day, made its point entirely by innuendo. Nevertheless, Louis B. Mayer was furious. The most celebrated unmarried couple named in the article were Clark Gable and Carol Lombard. As soon as Gable divorced his first wife, Rhea Langham, MGM made sure that he and Lombard tied the knot. MGM also forced Photoplay to back down with a threat to cancel advertising and, crucially, access to its stars. Round 2 went to Louis B. Mayer. But Mayer wanted more. Robert Taylor would have to marry Barbara Stanwyck. In one of his later movies, Her Cardboard Lover, co-starring Norma Shearer, Taylor has an interesting exchange.
I could not. Do you go to the theatre?
Oh, theatres, nightclubs, anything for a good time.
Yes, yes, but on the stage, the butler brings in a chicken. It looks like a chicken. It pretends to be a chicken, but it isn't a chicken. It's made of cardboard.
What of it?
You shall be my cardboard lover.
Barbara Stanwyck and her cardboard lover, Robert Taylor, were married in May 1939. After the press reception in Beverly Hills, Stanwyck returned to her ranch and Taylor to his hysterical mother. The next day, Stanwyck resumed filming Golden Boy, co-starring William Holden. Taylor reported to the set of Lady of the Tropics and a wedding scene with Hedy Lamarr. L.B. Mayer lit up a big cigar. Joan Crawford remembered that Taylor had gone through the ceremony in a daze. But he was pleased, not so much because he was now married to Barbara Stanwyck, but because this would enable him to get the tough guy parts previously denied him by the studio. But when given the chance to play an overage Billy the Kid, Taylor lacked the punch to portray the legendary outlaw. But he brought more conviction to the mobster he played in Johnny Eager, opposite a young Lana Turner.
Isn't that eager individual the handsomest thing you ever saw?
I don't think handsome is just the word. His face is well cut, but once for a moment there, it became hard. I think he'd beat a woman if she made him angry.
Let's stop all this Bush League nonsense. You don't want me to take you home, and you know it.
Of course I don't. Of course I don't want you to take me home.
With Stanwyck, Robert Taylor was a diligent and dutiful partner. But since her marriage to Frank Fay, she'd preferred the company of women to that of men. However, her marriage to Taylor provided security for both of them. Stanwyck's publicist and girlfriend, Helen Ferguson, now acted for her husband, too. And Stanwyck's presence kept Taylor at arm's length from marauding females. They were banished altogether when in 1943, Taylor volunteered for war service in the US Navy's Air Arm. He went on to become a flying instructor. Not exactly the stuff of his recent movies with MGM, but honorable service nonetheless. Despite appearances, Stanwyck was a little put out. Taylor was so much under the thumb of his wife, he'd not dared to tell her he was joining up. Professionally, Stanwyck had been enjoying the richest period in her career. The object of her calculating affections in Preston Sturges' 1941 comedy, The Lady Eve, was squillionaire naturalist and born sap Henry Fonda. The object of all female eyes, but fated to fall for card-sharp Stanwyck. With a little help, of course, from The Lady Eve. Fonda's modern Adam stood no chance against a scheming Stanwyck, giving one of the best performances in American film comedy.
Thank you.
In the same year, Stanwyck was reunited with Frank Capra in Meet John Doe. Her co-star was Gary Cooper.
Oh, oh, please, please, God, help me. John, look at me. You want to be honest, don't you? Well, you don't have to die to keep the John Doe ideal alive. Someone already died for that once. The first John Doe. And he's kept that idea alive for nearly 2,000 years. It was he who kept it alive in them. And he'll go on keeping it alive forever and always. For every John Doe movement these men kill, a new one will be born. That's why those bells are ringing, John. They're calling to us. Not to give up, but to keep on fighting, to keep on pitching. Oh, don't you see, darling? This is no time to give up.
In William Wellman's Lady of Burlesque, Stanwyck was a wisecracking stripper. 1944, in Billy Wilder's Double Indemnity, she was a double-crossing bottle blonde, luring salesman Fred McMurray into murder.
It all began last May. I was thinking about that dame upstairs and the way she had looked at me. And I wanted to see her again, close, without that silly staircase between us. How could I have known that murder can sometimes smell like honeysuckle?
I can't stand it anymore. What if they do hang me?
They're not going to hang you, baby.
It's better than going on this way.
They're not going to hang you. Because you're going to do it and I'm going to help you. You don't know Keyes. Once he gets his teeth into something, he never lets go. He'll investigate you. He'll have you shadowed. He'll watch you every minute from now on. You afraid, baby?
Yes, I'm afraid. But not of Keyes. I'm afraid of us.
I'd like to move in on her right now, tonight. If it wasn't for Norton and his striped pants ideas about company policy, I'd have the cops after her so quick it'd make a head spin. Now, we know the Dietrichson dame is in it, and somebody else.
Only you haven't got a single thing to go on, Keyes.
He'll show. He's got to show. Sometime, somewhere, they've got to meet.
In April 1945, American and Russian troops kept an historic rendezvous on the River Elbe. The end of the war in Europe was just weeks away, but its victorious conclusion was followed by the Cold War. During World War II, Robert Taylor had starred in MGM's Song of Russia, a hymn to America's gallant Soviet allies. Now the Soviets were enemies, and Stanwyck and Taylor stalwarts of the American right. They were founder members of the Motion Picture Alliance for the Preservation of American Ideals, an ultra-conservative organization that saw a communist hand behind the labor disputes which hit Hollywood in the late 40s. Stanwyck was a generous host to Alliance meetings and a contributor to its funds. In 1947, Taylor was a key friendly witness when Congress's Un-American Activities Committee held hearings in Hollywood. Taylor declared that he loathed communists so much that he would not work on a picture with anyone he suspected of being a Red. He also told the committee how to handle communists.
I personally, with all due regard to Mr. Hoover, whose opinion I respect most highly, certainly do believe that the Communist Party should be outlawed. However, I'm not an expert on politics or of what the reaction would be. If I had my way about it, they'd all be sent back to Russia or some other unpleasant place.
Simultaneously, Taylor's career at MGM was winding down. Like Johnny Eager, his face was becoming hard. In movies like Undercurrent, with Katharine Hepburn, Taylor emerged as a man under pressure.
Alan, what's the penalty for stealing books?
Stop shoving that book at me. Can't you see I don't want to discuss it? Don't you know by now whose book it is, don't you?
Alan, is he dead?
How should I know if he's dead? I don't know anything about him. I hope he is. How much do you think I can stand?
The problem was that in films like The Bribe, Taylor became morose rather than interesting.
What's the matter? Honor bug biting you? Don't like to think you took a dame away from a dying guy, is that it?
Take me.
Yeah.
Kiss me.
But Taylor seemed happier and gained a stay of execution at MGM in widescreen spectaculars like the 1951 Quo Vadis. Here the crowds could do the acting. with a little help from Deborah Kerr. As she grew older, Barbara Stanwyck was often cast as a woman under threat. But given the chance, as she was in Blowing Wild in 1953, she proved tougher than the combined talents of Anthony Quinn and Gary Cooper.
You've tried to wipe me off before. You never could.
Maybe I never tried hard enough.
Why do you always fight me, Jeff?
You have a husband.
You could have been my husband. Why aren't you?
Because you're no good, Marina.
And in Sam Fuller's 40 Guns, she was a superb heavy, dressed in black, doing her own stunts and riding roughshod over the 40 pistoleros of the title. One of Robert Taylor's last films at MGM was Nicholas Ray's Party Girl, in which he was impressively weary as a lawyer for the mob.
And there's this chick of yours, and that's what I call a real pretty chick. Face of an angel. You know what a bottle of acid would do to a face like that?
If you touch her, if anyone touches her, I'll kill you, Rico.
Taylor had left Barbara Stanwyck long before he parted company with MGM. They were divorced in 1952. Taylor married again to Ursula Thies in 1954. True to herself, Barbara Stanwyck never remarried. In 1956, there was an unsuccessful attempt to reunite her with Fred MacMurray in There's Always Tomorrow. However, Stanwyck remained the consummate professional. Cecil B. DeMille once observed of her, "I have never worked with an actress who was more cooperative, less temperamental, and a better worker." In 1965, Stanwyck was reunited on the set with Robert Taylor. But nearly 30 years had passed since their last movie together. They co-starred in a wretched William Castle programmer, The Nightwalker. Taylor died of cancer 4 years later. Stanwyck slugged on, a grande dame of Hollywood who never minded getting her hands dirty in television. In the 80s, she won an Emmy for The Thornbirds. She died in 1990. From convict to card sharp and cattle queen, one of the great Hollywood professionals. Her marriage to Robert Taylor had been engineered by his studio boss, but it gave these two great stars security and domestic happiness for over 10 years. In Hollywood's heyday, the big studios were able to manage the lives of their stars in a way which would be unthinkable today. Robert Taylor once said, revealingly of Louis B. Mayer, "He was always there when I had problems."
Oh, darling.
We never expected an ending like this, did we, dear?
There won't be any kind of ending now.
I never dreamed.
Neither did I. When did you first...
No, way back in the milk wagon, I take it.
Darling.
Ironically, during their time together, Robert Taylor had two wives. The first was Barbara Stanwyck. The second was Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. Barbara Stanwyck was married to her work, the ultimate Hollywood professional. But in the gap this left them, Robert Taylor and Barbara Stanwyck fashioned a partnership in front of the cameras and at home.